income tax led to prohibition.
Yeah.
And prohibition led to the rise of criminal gangs. They just did not exist. So you could say income tax gave America organized crime.
Fascinating.
And it's clear.
It's true.
But who would have thought when they introduced income tax in 1913 to get rid of the tariffs that this would cause organized crime? And similarly, debt or inflation or the fiat system has led to declining family size and mass immigration. You just would not make the connection, but it is there.
It is 100% there.
This is the thing about the way economists who work for the government think and bureaucrats think. They never measure opportunity cost.
Yeah.
It's the whole broken window fallacy.
You're 100% right.
All these other consequences, they do not factor them into their measurements ever. They just go, we did this policy and it led to this result, and therefore it gave us a 133% gain, whatever it is. They never measure all the
because they think that it's this hubris to think that you can know every single thing that's happening. When you start messing with the most important good of all, which is money, you're trying to fix all these things up here, but your foundation is so broken, it's destroyed. And then, you're wondering why the house is leaning this way. Well, you've got a broken foundation 5 levels down, which is really the money, right? Fix the money, fix the world. Welcome back to another episode of Cypherpunks. I'm here with Dominic Frisby, and we're going to discuss the next chapter in our series on his book, Daylight Robbery. This is perhaps one of the most interesting chapters because it's one of the most insidious forms of taxation. The unofficial tax, debt and inflation. Welcome, Dominic.
Thank you very much. Yes, 2 unofficial taxes, debt and inflation. And debt is very much a tax on the future. And there's a great quote from your man, Herbert Hoover: "Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt." And I think debt is immoral because you are taking on obligations now and leaving them to your descendants to pay off. And, our forebears, maybe the last lot, have done that a bit, but say 2 generations ago would not have done that. And even with taxes as high as they are, governments spend way more than they take in. Budget surpluses are rare. I don't even know when the last time the US government ran a budget surplus. I think it was an accidental one during Clinton because of the dot-com, all the money in the dot-com bubble. But before that, it goes back many, many years. And so debt isn't literally a tax, but it's a means of funding things. It's a tax on the future. And I don't quite know why, but it took the British longer to pay off their World War I debt than it did their World War II debt. We only finished up paying off our World War I debt in 2015, over 100 years later. So that's, people had nothing to do with that war or any of the, just nothing to do
insane.
with it. We're having to pay
It's
for
taxes without representation.
Absolutely it is. It is that. I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right. And your US debt, it doubled under Bush, it doubled under Obama, it doubled under Trump, it doubled under Biden. It's over 30 trillion. And what's going on now, this US golden age, that's not even paying off the debt. It's just reducing the deficit. And, whatever deficit I think you're a 2 trillion deficit. So that means 2 trillion is added to the debt this year. And he's just trying to get the deficit down to 1 trillion. It's not like you're still going to have loads of debt. And we've got every country, Germany, Britain, France, we've all got, national debt levels. I think UK GDP is equivalent to about $3 trillion and our national debt is in excess of that. It's nuts. And I just don't understand why the whole thing doesn't implode. And I just think it's what we were talking about before, the fiat. Currencies do go down the bond market takes them to account eventually and they lose money. But I think so much of the whole fiat system is just propped up by the fact that all the architecture around the fiat system, all the financial architecture, all the financial technology, and just the fact that if the system implodes, the whole economy comes crashing down. So I think that you're just going to see this gradual shift away from fiat to other currencies. But it's just nuts. The debt levels are nuts. And then the question is, who do we owe the money to? And it's a question that's often asked. And I think in the States, the numbers have slightly changed, but US debt is roughly 30% owed to foreign countries. So people like Japan, China, the UK is the third largest holder of US debt. How did that happen? I don't know. We sold the gold instead and decided to buy US treasuries. That was a good idea. And but also another third is owned by the federal government itself via social security funds, retirement funds, and all of that. They own US treasuries, US bonds. And then finally, the Federal Reserve Bank printed the money and bought the debt. I mean, I still don't get that. But anyway, but
it sounds like a Ponzi scheme.
Well, it is. And
but what about all these fancy terms like quantitative easing and quantitative tightening?
I know. And mutual funds, banks, pension funds, insurance companies, all these kind of people, investors, they own the rest. And I heard this. There's an anthropologist who's no longer with us, David Graeber.
He wrote a fantastic book too.
Debt: The History of Money. Yeah,
it's a great book. I don't know if I agree with all of his conclusions.
Well, he's a left wing guy, so you wouldn't. But
but he raised a lot of interesting points and did a lot of great historical research.
I mean, it was one of those books. I think it's one of those books. It's cooler to say you've read it.
Yeah,
a bit like what's his name, the friend Piketty. It's like cool to say. I think there was a thing with Piketty, his book Capital in the 21st Century, whatever it was, the big hit after the financial crisis. And it was one of the best-selling books on Amazon.
Really?
But it was also because Amazon can measure these things because it knows how far people have read by their Kindles and it tracks it. It was the most started and least finished book. So literally everyone was saying they read it when they hadn't. And I think Graeber's book, it was quite hard work in places. And so I think it's one of those. It's interesting.
I enjoyed the whole book for the most part. I think I just get the conclusion of the book was to me was just like, no response, like no accountability at the end. It was just kind of like this left-wing thought of like, we shouldn't have any responsibility, accountability. And we just like, fuck it.
Well,
don't pay your debts. That's what I got at the end of it.
Okay. Well, you're a good boy, and you probably listened to the audio book, which enabled you to get further. You can always get further with an audio book.
That's true.
But yeah, most of us probably own our own government's debt in our pensions if we've got official pensions. You and I don't. I don't own a single bond. I think it's immoral to buy government bonds because you're enabling them. That's an argument you never hear, but I'm sure it's
that's interesting.
Agree with. Yeah. Why would you enable them?
Yeah, that is wild to think about. Well, but I don't think many of the bond purchasers are buying them willingly. A lot of the time, I think it's very forced. It's very transactional.
Well, they grade their bonds. They say they're respectable assets. At one point, they were more respectable than gold. How can anything be more respectable than gold? But anyway, they
financial wizardry of scams.
And so the regulation meant that many pension funds and institutions were forced to buy them. But we know this money's not going to be paid back, or if it is going to be paid back, it's going to be paid back in vastly devalued US dollars. And just now, with interest rates having crept up after COVID, I think now the cost of servicing your debt is now bigger than your military budget. Is that right?
It's insane. I don't know if it's quite bigger, but I mean, just
it's a sizable chunk. I know the cost of us servicing our debt is like bigger than our education budget.
I mean, we're not. It's like, to see something like this when we're not in a world war is like there's no major war that's going on right now.
The war on woke.
But the debt levels that we're seeing now is like, if you look at history, it's unprecedented. We've kind of reached this. We've tipped over this edge. And Japan has always been raised as this. Oh, you can have higher debts, and it's not the end. It doesn't signal the end, but then we're seeing kind of stuff start to fray a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Japan is like it's amazing. Its debt is like 250%, and you wonder. I mean, I went to Japan and I absolutely loved it, but we were talking the other night and how there are people in Japan with 100-year mortgages and like a kid, 50-year-old kids still living with their parents because they can't afford, and no wonder they don't start families themselves, and the debt has done it, and so. I still don't know why this hasn't. I mean, we're kind of in a crisis because if people aren't reproducing and a man of 50 is living with his parents with a 100-year mortgage, that is the crisis. But it's not a heightened panic. It's a sort of gradual, ongoing thing.
No doubt about it. I don't think I got to make this point yesterday when we had our roundtable discussion with everybody, but it really comes back to the perversion and the destruction of money, right? With this idea of the money being so broken and the financialization of things as store of value, like housing, right? And it causes all these disconnects in economies and society, these perverse incentives where, now since the money is so distorted, the average person cannot buy a home and support a family on, one person's salary or just even on two people's salaries a lot of the times. And people are using property, which of course property should have some value, right? There's something scarce about it, but it's become completely financialized as the like collateral essentially for
Yeah.
the system, right? So like people buy all these houses just because they don't want to hold fiat that the government is stealing from them with this insidious tax. Copernicus, what did he say? It is like one of the most insidious taxes. I don't remember the exact quote. It's this insidious stealth tax, but
That's the inflation tax, but debt and inflation, there's so much crossover.
Yeah, I know we're about to hit inflation because, but that it just in my mind, it's just another rabbit hole we could go down. But.
Yeah, I tell you what amazes me, Matty, is the unforeseen, unintended consequences.
Yeah,
and we see it time and time again. Like yesterday, we talked that how income tax led to prohibition.
Yeah,
and prohibition led to the rise of gangland. Gang violence and criminal gangs that just did not exist. So you could say income tax gave America organized crime.
Fascinating.
And it's clear.
It's true.
But who would have thought when they introduced income tax in 1913 to get rid of the tariffs that this would cause organized crime? And similarly, debt or inflation or the fiat system has led to declining family size and mass immigration. Wow. You just would not make the connection, but it is there.
It is 100% there. It's when it goes back even to the window tax and the hearth tax. I mean, people took windows out of their houses and disease has skyrocketed. What is the cost of that on those civilizations and societies?
To disease.
It might have actually cost society more because who has to pay for the health? People are dying.
Absolutely,
it's a wild thing to think about.
This is the thing about the way economists who work for the government think and bureaucrats think. They only measure they don't measure they never measure opportunity cost.
Yeah.
It's the whole broken window fallacy.
You're 100% right.
Yeah, and they don't. All these other consequences, they do not factor them into their measurements ever. They just go, we did this policy and it led to this result, and therefore it gave us a 133% gain, whatever it is. They never measure all the
because they think that it's this hubris to think that you can know all of these things, and that you can know every single thing that's happening. And really, the reason the free market, this idea of the invisible hand, works so well is because prices of goods and services, it's impossible for everybody to know everything, but price sends out this signal to an economy. The person who needs a good might not know why the cost of something's going up, but he will calculate that into his production cost when he makes the next thing, and he'll pass that on to the next person. And these supply and demand mismatches and ratios and maybe this event happened here. All of this gets communicated through society, through price. And when you start messing with the most important good of all, which is money in a society, you build this foundation of a house. You're trying to fix all these things up here, but your foundation is it's broken, it's destroyed. And then, you're wondering why the house is leaning this way. Well, you've got a broken foundation 5 levels down, which is really the money, right? Fix the money, fix the world is.
I'm a big believer in that. And I'm also a big believer in fixed tax, fix the world. And, but I always say money is the blood of a society. If you think what blood is in the economy, I think money is.
That's a great analogy.
And it has to be healthy.
Yeah.
You've got unhealthy blood.
When you start blocking off arteries because you don't want this, and you do this, and you don't know what's going to happen, right?
It has
flows this way and flows this way, and it causes a
disaster. White blood cells and all the rest of it.
It's fascinating.
Let's talk about inflation. And it is insidious because it's hidden. And great Keynes quote: "It happens in a way not one man in a million is able to diagnose." And it goes undeclared, it's unseen, and it's misunderstood. And this is one of the brilliant things about Bitcoin. It is put inflation first and foremost. People suddenly realize what is causing it. It has been the most brilliant educative tool.
Mm.
We used to talk, like, I remember when I used to write about inflation and fiat money before Bitcoin came along, and I would have to keep explaining what fiat was. Now, everyone knows fiat. Anyone who, well, not everyone, there's still people who don't. But it is everywhere. And because governments measure inflation, they only include certain household everyday items in their inflation measures. And for example, in the UK, I'm going to get these numbers slightly wrong, but it's something like 13% of newly created money goes into consumer items, and something like 50% goes into either commercial or domestic real estate, and the rest goes into financial markets. Now, the inflation of financial markets, you know, look at the S&P. Tell me there's no inflation, and look at the S&P's performance over the last few years.
Asset inflation.
Money creation. It's not included in the measures of inflation. Look at the real estate markets. House prices are not included in conventional measures of inflation. But in the act of, you know, I lend you $1 million to buy this house, I have created $1 million that did not previously exist. And suddenly $1 million that did not previously exist is now going into the housing market, with the result there's $1 million more in the housing market. Well, there's only one way prices are going to go with all the newly created money. It's not included in measures of inflation. The only thing that's included in measures of inflation are consumer goods, which we, largely speaking, do not use credit to buy. So there's not the new money supply of newly created credit. And they are, broadly speaking, prone to the deflationary forces of improved productivity. As we get better at making stuff, it gets cheaper.
It should get cheaper.
Yeah. And this is why, if you look at how much like a loaf of bread cost in the time of the Old Testament, and you look at how much a loaf of bread costs today measured in gold, you can buy way more bread today than you could in the Old Testament for your ounce of gold. And that's because we got better at making bread. And we don't use credit to buy bread. But what's happened now with COVID and all the breakup of all the supply chains is that we suddenly even got inflation in these consumer goods that are included in the measures of inflation. So even the official numbers couldn't hide it. But official numbers need to take into account financial assets, housing, real estate, because that is real inflation, and that is the inflation that ordinary people feel. And it's a lie. The whole thing is a lie. Thank goodness for Bitcoin, because it's exposed the whole thing.
What I find most insidious of the whole thing is that they keep like rigging this metric and changing the metric to suit their narratives, and they go back and revise everything. I mean, it's just they're just a bunch of liars. They lie about everything. It's like I saw a couple months ago, there's something with coffee, like coffee prices exploded. So they're like, oh, this is going to make the CPI look bad, so we're going to take coffee out this time.
Yeah, what do they call it? Something hedonics. Hedonics, is that right?
Paul, can you look that up? What's the word hedonic?
No, it's a hedonics. And so, for example, they'll go, steaks have got really expensive, so we're not going to have steaks in it. We'll use hamburgers instead. Well,
I mean, you're just manipulating the metrics, right? Do you know the guy who does shadow stats?
Yeah, John. I've forgotten his name. John. Forgot his surname, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember his name as well. Paul, you can go to Shadow Stats as well. Look it up. So hedonics is in the context of economics and consumer price index, refers to a method used to adjust the prices of goods and services based on changes in their quality or features over time. The goal is to isolate the pure price change from changes in product quality, ensuring that the CPI accurately reflects the cost of living. Oh, God.
What's so beautiful about all of this?
They try to justify their bullshit.
It's not even interesting. Yeah. If you go back to the gold standard, which ended in 1914. If you look at consumer price, Britain went back on the gold standard in 1821 after Napoleonic. So we came off the gold standard. And you look at consumer prices in Britain between 1821 and 1914, so almost 100 years. Over the course of that 100-year period, they came down by 2/3. So stuff got cheaper.
That's the big argument.
The value of a salary increased. Yeah. And that explains the sudden explosive growth of the educated middle class in Britain. They did not previously exist.
That's a great stat.
And the first thing people spend their money on after they've got clothing and food and shelter is self-improvement, education. And Britain went from being largely illiterate to being largely literate. And it was all because the money was sound. And the only time there was inflation was in the 1860s. Now, I wonder what happened there. War. The money got debased. And apart from that, and even with the enormous increase in the gold supply that resulted from all the gold rushes of the second, didn't make any difference. Prices stayed stable.
Yeah. I think that's the natural state of things. As everything goes down, price should go down over time, on many consumer goods and things, right? So that's the big argument. They always say we have to have inflation. We can't have deflation. Well, I reject that argument. I think you absolutely can in some of the most productive periods in human history, from the Gilded Age to all these different time periods where we were on a gold standard or a hard money standard. I think we had just tremendous productivity, and the cost of things should go down over time.
Of course it should.
So
houses don't cost a lot of money to build.
Yeah.
We're better at building houses. We've got cranes and tanks and trucks and all this stuff. And houses. There's no shortage of land on which to build the houses. There might be a shortage of land that overlooks Naples Bay or something, but there's a short. Prices now, according to Reinhardt and Rogoff, are 30 times higher than 100 years ago. And most currencies have lost, the pound has lost 40% of its purchasing power just since 2020.
Well, this is the main argument of houses are being, people are storing value in property.
They're financial assets.
Which is having all these unforeseen consequences on,
owning real estate has been the only way an ordinary family can get exposure to money supply growth.
Yeah.
And they think that they've made a lot of money on their house. No, all you've done is protect yourself from money supply growth.
Mm.
And and you just look at the number of dollars in circulation, and then we've got the fiscal drag thing that we were talking about earlier, so more people are dragged into higher rates of tax. And let's talk about house prices. So in the 650 years, from 1290 to 1940, prices rose 887%. That sounds a lot, but it's 650 years. It's 0.4% annualized. So it's nothing, 0.4%. And adjusted for inflation, house prices actually fell by 50% from 1290 to 1940.
Fascinating.
But since 1939, house prices in the UK have risen 42,000%. 42,000% just since 1940. 8% annualized.
I think that...
and it's money supply growth. And then the result is nobody can afford a house, so they don't have kids, and then the smaller families, the people die out, and then the government goes, we don't have enough people, let's import a load of people. And the culture dies because it's not the same people.
Massive transfer of wealth. All comes back to the corruption of money.
Yeah.
And what do they call the renter's generation now, right? It's like
generation rent.
I'm lucky I own my home, but I know I have many friends and people that I know that are my generation that do not own their own home and couldn't own their own home at this point. My house has gone up my house has like tripled in value in like 5-6 years. It's like kind of wild.
It's nuts.
It's nuts.
And average wages have risen, but not by anything like as much as the purchasing power of money has fallen. And the result is that what a middle-class lifestyle that was affordable on one salary once upon a time now requires 2 salaries, fewer children, yada, yada. And as I say, the way that central banks measure inflation is fraudulent, and that's why nothing is ever done at the policy level. And thank goodness we have Bitcoin, because you've got a means of avoiding it. And some sectors of society benefit from the inflation. I heard Larry the other day Larry Lepard call them cantillionaires. And it's people who are closest to the issuance of new money, the financial sector or the New York or the London property markets in which the financial sector mostly live. They've made fantastic gains. You borrow money at 0% and you buy 8% yielding assets or whatever it is, and you make a fortune. But there is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. Keynes said that, not me. And the art of taxation, that Colbert quote, consists of plucking the goose so as to obtain the most feathers with the least possible hissing. This is what happens. It's undeclared, it's unseen, it's not properly understood. The inflation tax means the goose is plucked noiselessly. It is the stealthiest of stealth taxes, the most insidious tax there is, and it is loathsome.
From the Roman and medieval kings, flipping coins, to quantitative easing, to fiat money, and the printers go burr. Here we are today.